Nigeria's inflation rate for the month of February inched up to 15.7% from 15.6% recorded in January. According to the recent release of the Consumer Price Index for the month of February by the NBS, headline inflation rate slowed down in February when compared to the same month in the previous year, as increases were recorded in all classifications of individual consumptions by purpose-driven divisions that yielded the headline index. Urban inflation rate increased by 16.25% year-on-year on February 2022 from 17.92% recorded in February 2021, while rural inflation rate increased by 15.18% in February 2022 from 16.77% in February 2021. Similarly, the Composite Food Index rose by 17.11%, indicating a decrease by 4.68 percentage points in February 2022 compared to 21.79% recorded in February 2021. It will interest you to know that the increase in the inflation rate further threatens the 13% inflation target for 2022. That's for the federal government in its key projections and assumptions for the 2022 budget. Well, I introduced him earlier. Let's break this down. I have the Chief Investment Officer at AfriInvest West Africa, Mr. Robert Omotunde. Good afternoon, Mr. Omotunde. It's good to see you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Amid the fuel crisis, inflation hits 15.70%. Make us understand this. Well, a lot of us were expecting it actually, but was this what you were really looking at? Was this what you expected?
Well, I think largely it's in line with expectation, even though base effect. So base effect actually helped to cushion the impact of fuel scarcity, which we should have seen in the headline inflation. Now, 15.7% right now for February inflation from 15.6, we suggest only about 10 basis point move in inflation. But the truth is that in February 2022, we experienced a lot of scarcity. And I'm glad you spoke to the Association of the representative of the Association of Marketers. I think he's been honest, to be candid. What we should have seen right now, assuming we have full deregulation of the downstream sector, should have been a much more debilitating impact, in terms of headline inflation. Because, amidst all of the scarcity we saw in February, to a very large extent, prices were still hovering within the regulatory, price of 143 naira per liter. Now, what we should expect in terms of inflation, I think the target of 13% is a lot ambitious in a year like 2022. Nobody envisaged that we are going to see Russia is going to invade Ukraine the way they have done. And no matter what anybody thinks or what the world says, it doesn't seem as though Russia is going to backtrack. So even if they made a mistake, I think they would rather continue with this mistake, So that said, it means that in terms of inflation, what we'd expect for 2022 will still be something, much higher or within this level. I think we will begin to see some acceleration, most likely. Now, we have, energy crisis right now. The power sector is facing it. Even the cluster consumers who have arrangement with the discos are also facing it big
so
time.
It's double wahala, like they say.
So if you look at it, and some will say it's grid collapse. Grid collapse combined with high rising oil prices, we also mean that gas prices are, skyrocketing. And if you look at, the quantum of gas-fired turbines we have from the generating plants that we run in the country, you find out that they are mostly gas-fired. So this energy crisis is global, and Nigeria will not be an exception. The more reason why the government should actually consider doing away with subsidy. I think our estimate of subsidy payments could be as high as 5.2 trillion. There's an argument that the government will say, okay, yes, it's been shared by the 3 tiers of government, which is now true. So the element of the federal government in it may just be about 43% or so of that 5.2 trillion. But the state will bear the brunt and the local government, and in any case, the earlier we move away We say it all the time. It's not to say that we will not feel the impact. I think Mr. Clement was saying if it had been done by now, you'd probably be buying fuel at 500 naira per liter. But that's the same thing happening with diesel. Diesel prices used to be as low as 320, but now people are buying for 700. But the heavens have not, fallen. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that if we want the government to prosper, we cannot continue to encourage government to pay subsidy. As you can see, all the neighboring countries, from Republic of Benin to Cameroon to Chad, it's free business for everybody. I mean, 143 naira per liter compared to what the reflective price should be in naira terms, maybe it's even closer to 600 naira. So I mean, that incentive, over 400 naira spread, for a journey of how many kilometers, within the borders. So if you think about it, it makes economic sense for people to smuggle the products from our country to the neighboring countries. So, and the way the economies are structured, it's very difficult to stop people. It's like trying to hold water from flowing.
Very difficult.
The best way is to just allow the price adjustment mechanism control all of this. Let's go full-fledged market. Whilst it will be tough, the gains will come, and then people will become more rational. People drive SUVs all over the place, when even they don't need it. So people will then start to think more rationally. So
even if you can afford ACs on,
so even if you can afford the SUV, then you can now start talking to yourself that, okay, I would rather get the salon car because of the energy savings I then try to. I mean, but when we've been subsidizing these products for way too long. We've robbed the people of their thinking capacity. I mean, we are talking about energy prices. I mean, look at what is happening in the US. US is far more richer than Nigeria, by any context you want to look at it. They don't subsidize consumption of fuel. I mean, just look at it. Energy prices can be as high as $3.50. Just do the implication of that, in naira terms. It gives you an idea, though. There's element of the wage bill in the US factored into that. But I mean, it's high time we do away with subsidy.
Clearly, there were high increases in gas, liquid, fuel, wine, tobacco, spirit, narcotics, solid fuels, amongst others. When compared to what we had in February 2021, what's your reaction? 1.63% lower compared to that.
Well, I think it is expected. Like I said, we're talking about the increases in energy prices.
True.
So even though the electricity sector is deregulated right now, it's still regulated somewhat. You won't see that passage into electricity prices, but at least we saw it for some components of energy, like the diesel prices we mentioned. Fuel prices will still remain stable. Even though when scarcity comes, what then happens is that some find opportunity to also make a bit of spread above the regulatory prices. So that's expected. And we are comparing February to January. I think it was later part of February that we started seeing the increases the first scarcity crisis. We then dovetail into March. But I think things have, subsided now. So maybe by the time we are looking at March inflation, in April, we will see something much muted. But I think there are pressure points, from the perspective of energy prices, to be honest with you, because there are no people don't have enough power from the grid, so then people move towards powering their generators, using all the, particularly the diesel users. What you then see is that there might be increases in those, coupled with the fact that oil prices are then increasing on
Now, World Bank has already projected before now that we will have the worst inflation, one of the countries with the worst inflation for 2022, and our budget is predicated on 13%. You already reacted to that, and that looks like it's so ambitious. Now, looking at what the World Bank has said and all that we have on ground, realities that we face, what are you thinking?
So what I think is this. I think World Bank probably made that projection, thinking government will stick to its initial decision to remove subsidy. But right now, government has, postponed that by, I think it's 18 months, so perhaps they are targeting doing that after the elections, when the new government is already in. So to that extent, I think we may not see pressure coming from, the energy side of things, especially from the electricity sector as well, because you are not seeing, price reflective tariff in our electricity sector as well. So from that extent, we may see some muted, performance. Where I think the pressure may come majorly may still be from food. We have imported inflation, for as long as, our exchange rate issues still subsist, and some of the global issues are still, eminent.
And beyond us.
What we will then see is that, there will be some sort of imported inflation. But in terms of the contribution to the CPI, I think is also muted, because it's just about 15% imported inflation, if not 12%, but we also have other pressure that may come from food and its implication. I don't know if you've heard about, the possible crisis that may be coming from, some food items like chicken, because of the feeds for chicken. Wheat is a major thing that they consume, and it has been said that most of these come from the West, Russia and the likes, so all this Russia and Ukraine crisis and all of the sanctions are possibly going to impact on some of those feeds, because farmers may then have to go to the local alternative. The local alternative is maize, and maize is a bit more expensive than the imported wheat, again, because of our own issues within the country. So the tendency is that we will see pressure from some food items, and I think we should get prepared for that. Now, why that is more important to us is because food contributes about 51% to the component consumer price index, which is the index or the basket that measures inflation in Nigeria. So to the extent that that is still the case, what we would expect is higher food prices, and which will then translate into the headline inflation. So that's why the 13% target may be a bit too ambitious.
So let me follow up with this now. Let's focus on the masses now. I'm not looking at the impact of this. My salary hasn't changed, and everything is very expensive at the moment. Absolutely. Yes, you buy food at home and all of that, and purchasing power remains almost the same. What impact will all of these figures have on that day-to-day activities, the impact on the welfare of Nigerians, and of course, on businesses, turnovers and profit margins?
You see, it's very unfortunate where we find ourselves as a country. The fact is that we have our own peculiar issues that we were, battling with.
Yeah.
And then comes this global shock with this, Russia, Ukraine, war, and all of its impact on energy costs and the likes. We are going to be honest with ourselves. It's going to get worse for the common man, because again, the wage bill, like you mentioned, remains the same. So consumer income remains the same. So what you're seeing every day is shrinking consumer wallets. The purchasing power of an average Nigerian is shrinking by the day. So, and this also has impact on growth, because if income has not increased, and food prices you are seeing supply shocks coming from, from the supply side of the economy. The implication is that you have a bloated economy in nominal terms, but the real economic activities, someone who will consume maybe a kilogram of chicken before, we then have to consume half a kilogram of chicken.
Of course.
So the implication of that is that in real terms, economic activities will contract.
Yep.
But in nominal terms, you may see, that we are growing nominally. GDP nominally may even grow by 10%. But in real terms, we may shrink by 5%. That is the reality of where we find ourselves. But in terms of how the average Nigerian will cope, what will happen is a shift towards necessities. While income remains the same and prices are rising, depending on the elasticity of demand for the commodities in question, for things like food, what you would then see is that, there may be little or no significant change. If people must consume certain items for them to have a balanced diet, they won't necessarily change that, to the extent they can afford it. So what they would necessarily then do will mean to, shift if there is no, energy, and they will run on generator for 24 hours. They may think of running on 12 hours, just to save some income to be able to meet the necessities. So the necessity goods are most likely, able to retain their, output in terms of demand, but what then suffer will be other aspects of the economy where people will then have to shift. Luxury goods are the ones that will suffer the most at this point in time, because you have to stay alive before you think of the luxury.
Yeah.
So people may now, reduce their spend on clubbing. They may reduce their spends on, any luxury items. Parties. Ashwebi, as we like to do it in this part of the world.
You're correct.
Those are the things that I now think that there will be some form of reallocation of consumer
to manage
income,
resources,
so that you're able to manage the resources more efficiently. So, but the necessity goods, like I say, will most likely still benefit. They may not necessarily suffer.
Tackling inflation is one big one for me.
Absolutely.
Because it's like Tea Party.
Yeah.
Now, how do you see, because looking at the key drivers and all of that, how do you see us tackling this? And I'm also thinking, what will be running in the minds of the MPC guys as they, prepare to meet anytime soon?
Well, it's not an exciting time.
It's not at all. It's
to be honest.
And
that's because for them, price stability is their mandate. Price stability, exchange rate stability is their mandate. But I think that MPC is not alone in the sense that the current global inflation phenomenon, it's general, it's global.
Yeah.
It's a global phenomenon now, especially because of energy inputs, aspect of it. What I think the MPC can do at this time is to stay course with their recent policy. Typically when there are pressure in terms of price levels, what you would theoretically do is to say, let us put a rein on cost of credits, interest rates, generally speaking. But how do you use the instrumentality of interest rates to address issues that are caused by the supply side factors? Because the current global inflation phenomenon, it's a supply side issue, right? So, but be that as it may, you will still see countries like the Fed, Fed and a number of systemic central banks, ECB, and Bank of England. They will move towards tightening, just to put a rein on inflation, right? But I would recommend that the current inflationary pressure we are facing in Nigeria now cannot be tackled by raising interest rates. If you raise interest rates, you actually complicate the issue. So I would suggest that the MPC, and the central bank, by extension, continues to maintain the current heterodox policy. By the way, the current inflationary trend, should be supporting higher interest rates within the economy. But tactically, the DMO and the central bank has been able to put a rein on interest rates in the primary markets through the treasury bill issuances and the bond issuances. So somehow the price of credit within the system, interest rate generally speaking, is much lower than even where the MPR is. MPR currently is at 11.5. 1 year rate now is sub 5%, coming from the DMO. So that suggests to you that somehow the central bank, the DMO can still find a way to still manage, the current situation by not necessarily hiking, the MPR. Then the issue would then be the generality of, investors are clamoring for higher yield, which is the challenge that I face from where I sit on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Investors are asking for higher rates that will beat inflation. Whereas, the risk-free rates, it's far. If you look at the spread between the risk-free and the MPR, is up to 6.5% and counting. So that's a very huge spread. So before you then find similar rates that can at least, give something that will compensate. You're not likely to find a spread higher than 200 to 300 basis points, which is not satisfying investors at the moment because they are looking at where the inflation is and where their return on investment is. So, but I mean, the reality of our situation right now is if we must get a positive real return in Nigeria today, the government will have to suffer because the rate of borrowing is also rising. So the cost of debt, for as long as interest rate is rising, it's not in favor of government, given the budget of 2022. So it's in the interest of the central bank, in collaboration with the DMO, to ensure that interest rate is, seriously curtailed, so that if you have any skyrocketing in interest rate, then government pays more, for the debt that they plan to raise in this current fiscal year.
Very interesting conversation. Yeah. I must thank you so much. Chief Investment Officer there, AfriInvest West Africa, Mr. Robert Omotunde, giving us insights into what this means. 15.70% inflation figures for the month of February 2022. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right.